Daf Yomi, Tractate Bava, page 26b. Because of time, we had to stop at the bottom of 26a, so we'll continue at this point from the bottom of 26a, a few lines from the bottom, near a few lines before the Mishnah, with the words Rav Acha of Difti. Rav Acha of Difti said to Ravina, so too, it is reasonable to say that there is an obligation to pay ransom in the case of trampling, as if it enters your mind to say that there is no obligation to pay ransom in the case of trampling, and the Tana derived his a fortiori inference from damage caused by trampling. Let the Gemara refute it in this way. What is notable about damage caused by trampling? It is notable in that these same halachot apply to trampling, while there is no obligation to pay ransom in the case of trampling. In other words, it would be possible to derive the obligation to pay a full ransom where a person was killed by the goring of an innocuous ox while on the property of the victim, only if there is also an obligation to pay ransom where the person was killed by trampling. Rather, isn't it correct to conclude from it that an a fortiori inference must be based on the obligation to pay ransom in a case of trampling, and therefore it may be concluded that evidently there is an obligation to pay ransom in a case of trampling. The Gemara affirms, conclude from it that this is so. Mishnah. Adam muad le'olam. Bein shovig bein mezid. Bein bein yashen. Sima es ein chavero. Vishiber es hakelim. Mishalem nezek shalem. The legal status of a person is always that of one forewarned. Therefore, whether the damage was unintentional or intentional, whether it was awake or while he caused it while he was asleep, whether he blinded another's eye or broke vessels, he must pay the full cost of the damage. Adam mulil bein shogig ubein mezid. That's a harsh statement. A man is always forewarned. If someone makes a mistake, you're always responsible. Wow. But we make mistakes all the time. That means we're responsible all the time. Is that because of our sinful nature? Gemara. The Gemara infers, it teaches in the Mishnah, he blinded another's eye, and presumably this is similar to the other example, broke vessels. From this it can be inferred that just as there, in the case of broken vessels, yes, one must pay for the damage he caused, but he does not pay the 4 types of indemnity. So too, in the case where he blinds another, yes, he must pay for the damage he caused, but he does not pay the 4 types of indemnity, since he caused the injury while asleep or unintentionally. And now we are on the top of 26b. Menahani mili. From where are these matters derived? With regard to the halacha that one must pay the full cost of the damage in a case where there was no intent to cause damage, the Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived? Chizkiah says, and similarly the school of Chizkiah taught, the verse states, wound for wound, petza tachas patza, Exodus 21:25. This phrase is superfluous. As the Torah states elsewhere, see Leviticus 24:19, that one is liable to pay compensation when injuring another. This verse serves to render him liable to pay for the unintentional damage, just as he pays for the intentional damage. And he pays for damage caused by accident, just as he pays for damage caused willingly. Wow. That's harsh. That means our accidents are still our faults, even if we didn't mean to do it. But we do accidents all the time. Yeah, you're human. But there's also grace. Let's not forget about grace, folks. Continue. The Gemara asks, but this verse is necessary in order to indicate that one must pay compensation for pain, even in a case where he pays compensation for damage caused by the injury. Consequently, it seems that the verse cannot also be the source for the principle derived by the school of Chizkiah. The Gemara answers, if it is so that the superfluous phrase is intended to teach only that, then let the verse write Petza Bipatza, which carries the same meaning. What then is meant by the superfluous word tachas, tachat, in the phrase tachat patza? It indicates that we must derive two conclusions from it. That one is liable to pay for pain, even in a case where he pays compensation for damage, and that he is liable for unintentional damage as he is for intentional damage, and for damage caused by accident as for damage caused willingly. Amar Rabba. Rabba says, Haisa Evan Menachas lo b'cheiko v'lo hikir ba v'amar v'nafla l'inyan nezakin chayev l'inyan arba devarim pater l'inyan Shabbos melachas machshavos asr Torah l'inyan galus pater. Rabba says, if there was a stone lying in one's lap and he was unaware of it, and he arose and it fell and caused damage, with regard to damages, he is liable to pay the full cost of the damage caused by the stone. With regard to the four types of indemnity, he is exempt. With regard to Shabbat, if the falling stone caused him to violate one of the prohibited categories of labor, for example, if a stone fell from a private domain to the public domain, he is exempt. The reason is that the Torah prohibited only planned constructive labor on Shabbat, and he did not plan to perform this labor. With regard to exile, the punishment prescribed for one who unintentionally but negligently kills another, were this stone to kill someone else, is exempt, as the incident is deemed accidental. So that's a connection, I think. That's a connection, folks. The connection is that on Daf B, 26b has 39 lines in the Vilna edition. And 39 malachas of Shabbos. And it talks about malachas machshavos asr Torah le'inyan Shabbos. 39 lines, 39 malachos, malachas machshavos asr Torah. That's the connection for today. Not always do we have these connections, but sometimes we do. If you want to stretch it a little further, you can go Inyan Galus Pater. With regard to Galus is talked about in Masechtas Makos, and there are 39 Makos. So there are 39 lines. It's another connection. It's stretching it, but it's something. Inyan Evet Pulukta de Rabbanan Shimon ben Gamliel Rabbanan de Tanya. Hare Shehaya Rabo Rofei V'Amarlo Kechol Ini V'Sima Hatorli Shini V'Hipila Sichek Ba'adon V'Yatzel Cherus. With regard to a Canaanite slave whose tooth was destroyed or eye was blinded by the stone, potentially enabling the slave to earn his freedom, see Exodus 21, 26, and 27. This is the subject of the dispute between Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel and the rabbis, as it is taught in a Braita, Tosefta 925. Wow, that came up today, 925, Tosefta 925. If the master was a doctor, and the slave said to him, paint the lid of my eye in order to heal it, and paint it with, obviously some medication, whatever, and the master blinded it during the procedure, or if the slave requested from his master, scrape my tooth in order to heal it, to get out the cavity or whatever, and the master knocked out the tooth while scraping it, the slave has mocked the master as he is emancipated due to the act of the master himself. By contrast, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says the slave is not emancipated in these cases because the verse states, and destroy it, Veshichas, Exodus 21:26, from which it is derived that the slave is emancipated only in a case where the master intends to destroy the eye or the tooth, but not if he intended to heal the slave. So too, in the case where a stone fell and accidentally blinded a slave's eye or knocked out his tooth, according to the rabbis, the slave would be emancipated, and according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, he would not. All of the above cases relate to situations where the individual did not know the stone was in his lap. If he was initially aware of it, but he forgot about it and he rose and it fell. With regard to damages, he is currently liable, being that he is liable even if he was unaware of the stone. With regard to the 4 types of indemnity, here too he is exempt, as he did not intend to cause injury. With regard to exile, he is liable, as the verse states, one who unwittingly strikes a person mortally. Numbers 35:11, indicating by inference that the assailant had some previous awareness. And in this case, he was in fact previously aware of the stone in his lap. The term unwittingly is employed to describe someone who possessed knowledge of the potential transgression and then forgot about it. With regard to Shabbat, he is exempt, as this was not planned constructive behavior. With regard to a slave, the same dispute between Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel and the rabbis applies. In the case where he intended to throw the stone, and he intended to throw it for a distance of only 2 cubits, but instead he threw it a distance of 4 cubits, as it went farther than he wanted it to go, with regard to damages, he is liable. With regard to the 4 types of indemnity, he is exempt. With regard to Shabbat, he is exempt, as we planned, constructive behavior as a condition for liability. With regard to exile, he is liable, as the Merciful One states in the Torah, if a man lie not in wait. Exodus 21:13, which serves to exclude from the death penalty in a situation where one intended to throw a stone for 2 cubits, but he actually threw it for 4 cubits, and as he did not intend to kill. So he is exiled. With regard to a slave, the same dispute between Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel and the rabbis applies. Niskavin lizrok arba v'zorek shmona. That's kind of hard to gauge, right? To say you tried to throw 4. Does anyone know what it means to try to throw 4? How can you prove that? Devarim shebalev enam devarim. I mean, you're running some fine lines here. This kavan lizrok arba. How can you prove that he intended to it? And if he intended to throw the stone 4 cubits, but instead he threw it 8 cubits, with regard to damages, he is liable. With regard to the 4 types of indemnity, he is exempt. With regard to Shabbat, if he said to himself, when he threw the stone, that he would be satisfied wherever it may land, then yes, he is liable, as he intended to throw it at a distance of 4 cubits, which is the minimum necessary to violate the prohibited labor of carrying the public domain. If he did not throw the stone aimlessly, but rather had selected a target that was 4 cubits away, then he is not liable, as he did not perform the precise planned constructive labor that he had intended. With regard to exile, the Torah states, if a man lie not in wait, Exodus 21:13, which serves to exclude from the death penalty a situation where one intended to throw it 4 cubits and he actually threw it 8 cubits, as he did not intend to kill, so he is exiled. With regard to a slave, the same dispute between Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel and the rabbis applies. For time, I think we're going to stop over here. Wow, we're just making it, 15, right here.